He was carried off to the ambulance. I went on towards the bridge. The cannon and rifle fire still raged fiercely, but none of the shots reached the bank where we were. We had to repeat the trying process of crossing the swaying bridge by fours at walking pace. I led off with 4 troopers. It was not so tedious this time, as my eyes were distracted by the view of the green meadows on the opposite side. The Colonel had disposed the brigade in such a way that he could concentrate his fire upon the bridge and the opposite bank in case we could not maintain our position there. A squadron on our left, concealed in the sand quarry, was directing its fire upon the heights where the German artillery was posted. Both up and down the stream the Chasseurs d'Afrique lined the river banks, making use of every scrap of cover. Peeping out over the trunks of fallen trees, banks and ditches, inquisitive heads could be seen wearing the khaki taconnet. But my troubles were not yet over. Just as I was going to step ashore from the bridge, Captain D. brought me the Colonel's orders to recross the river with my whole squadron and occupy a clump of houses to the left of the bridge. It was evidently a wise precaution. Although no firing had come from this direction, it was quite possible that some of the enemy might have slipped through the woods and come halfway down the slopes. But I did not expect such a bad time as I was going to have. At the very moment when I was turning back and was beginning the hateful passage for a third time, the enemy gunners, changing their objective, aimed at the bridge, and the shrapnel bullets began disturbing music once more. Could any situation be more execrable than ours? To be upon a bridge as thin as a thread, hanging as if by a miracle over a deep ravine, to see this bridge enfiladed by heavy musketry fire, and to be obliged to walk our horses over the 200 yards which separated one bank from the other. If we had been on foot, so that we could have run and expended our strength in getting under cover, since we could not use it to defend ourselves, we should not have complained. But to be mounted on good horses, which in a few galloping strides could have carried us behind the ramparts of houses, and to be obliged to hold them back instead of spurring them on, was very unpleasant, and made us feel foolish. I looked at the 4 brave Chasseurs in front of me. They instinctively put up their shoulders as high as they could, as if to hide their heads between them. But not one of them increased his pace. Not one of them looked round at me to beg me to give his orders for a quicker advance. And what a concert was going on all the time! Whilst the horses' hoofs were beating out low and muffled notes, the bullets flew above us and around us with shrill cracklings and whistlings which were anything but harmonious. Happily the firing was distant and disgracefully bad, for at the pace we were travelling we must have offered a very convenient mark. Another 20 yards. 10 more. At last we were safely under cover. I communicated the Colonel's orders to the Captain, who came to join us, and directed us to occupy the little garden of a fair-sized house situated just on the edge of the Marne and most advanced of a small group of buildings on the left-hand side of the bridge. After lodging the horses in an alley between the house and an adjoining shanty, I went to reconnoitre my ground. The house was a rustic restaurant, which in the summer no doubt afforded the inhabitants an object for a walk. On passing along the terrace leading to the river, I found the disorder usual in places that have been occupied by the Germans. Tables overturned, bottles broken, the musty smell of empty casks and broken crockery. The little garden did not offer much protection for my men. However, crouching behind a kind of breastwork of earth which shut it off from the woods, they were able at least to hide themselves from view. I at once posted my sharpshooters, sent out a patrol on foot as far as the entrance to the wood, and then turned my attention to what was happening near the bridge. Whilst I was busy carrying out the Captain's orders, I had not noticed that the situation had undergone a decided change, and that our chances of being able to complete our task thoroughly had increased considerably. The German guns were no longer aiming at the village. Their fire had become more rapid, and their shrapnel flew hissing over the barricade. We could see them bursting much further off, on the other side of the water, in the direction of the woods crowning the heights whence in the morning I had admired the smiling landscape. I inferred then that the advance guard of our corps was debouching. In half an hour it would be there, and the German cavalry, we felt sure, would not hold out much longer. But our fine infantry had done more than this. They had, no doubt, found good roads, or perhaps the German gunners, hypnotised by the village, had not spied them. For I had now the pleasure of witnessing one of the most exhilarating spectacles I had seen since the opening of the campaign. From where I stood on the bank, I could see the thin line of the bridge above. I did not think that anyone would risk crossing it now that it was known to be a mark for the enemy's fire. But suddenly I saw 5 men appear and begin to cross it. I could distinguish them perfectly. They were infantry soldiers, an officer and 4 men. The officer walked first, calmly, with a stick under his right arm and in his left hand a map which formed a white patch on his blue coat, and behind him the men in single file, bending slightly under their knapsacks, their caps pushed back and holding their rifles, marched firmly and steadily. They might have been on parade. Their legs could be distinguished for a moment against the blue sky. Their step was so regular that I could not help counting 1, 2, 1, 2 as their feet struck the bridge. But just at that moment, when the little group had got halfway across, a hiss, followed by a deafening explosion, made our hearts beat, and we heard the curious noise made by the innumerable bullets and pieces of a shell striking the water. The Germans had seen our infantry beginning to cross the river, and they were now pouring their fire upon the bridge. I looked again at the men, and saw they were there, all 5 of them, still marching with the same cool, resolute step. 1, 2, 1, 2. Ah, the brave fellows! How I wanted to cheer them, to shout "Bravo!" But they were too far off, and the noise of the fusillade would have prevented them from hearing me. No sooner had they reached the bank than another little group stepped on to the narrow bridge, and then after them another, and each was saluted by 1 or 2 shells, with the same heavy rain of bullets falling into the water. But Providence protected our soldiers. The outline of the bridge was very slight, and the gunners of the German cavalry divisions were very sorry marksmen. Their projectiles always burst either too far or too near, too high or too low. And as soon as 100 men had got across, and the first sharpshooters had clambered up the heights that rise sheer from the river and begun to debouch upon the plateau, there was a sudden silence. The enemy's cavalry had given way, and our corps d'armée was free to pass the Marne by the bridge of Jaulgonne. The entire battalion of the advance guard then began to pour over the bridge on their way to the plateau. Our brigade was quickly got together, and our chasseurs hastened to water their horses. Out came the nosebags from the saddlebags. A few minutes later no one would have suspected that fighting had taken place at this spot. The men hurriedly got their snack, for we knew the halt would not last long, and that the pursuit had to be pushed till daylight failed. Our troop was in good heart and thankful that the squadron's losses had been so small. F. had just seen Laurent, the one wounded chasseur of his troop, and said the doctors hoped to save his eye, so we had no reason to grumble. Saddlebags were now being buckled and horses rebridled. I was to go forward to replace the troop that had led the advance guard. The Colonel sent for me and ordered me to proceed at once along the road to Fismes, search the outskirts of the village carefully, and take up a position on the heights overlooking the valley. My troop got away quickly, and I rejoiced again at the sight of my fellows, radiant at the thought of having a dash at the enemy. We had to hasten to get ahead of the foremost parties of infantry, which also halted for a meal. I detached my advance scouts. Their eager little horses set off at a gallop along the white road, and I was delighted to see the ease and decision with which my chasseurs flashed out their swords. They seemed to say, come along, we are ready." As for me, I rode on in quiet confidence, knowing that I had in front of me eyes keen enough to prevent any surprise. One squad climbed nimbly up the ridge to the left. The horses scrambled up the steep ground, dislodging stones and clods of earth. They struggled with straining hocks hard to get up, and seemed to challenge each other for a race to the top. Their riders, in extended order, showed as patches of red and blue against the grey stubble. Up they went, further and further, and then disappeared over the crest. Only one was still visible, but this one was my guarantee that I had good eyes, keen and alert, on my left. Should any danger threaten from that quarter, I knew well that he would pass on to me the signal received from his corporal, and I should only have to gallop to the top to judge the situation for myself. I could see the man against the blue sky, the whole outline of his body and that of his horse, the equipment and harness, the curved sword, the graceful neck, the sinewy legs, the heavy pack. I recognised the rider and knew the name of his horse. They were both of the right sort. Yes, I felt quite easy about my left. On the right the ground dropped sheer to a narrow valley, at the bottom of which flowed a stream of clear water. Among the green trees were glittering patches here and there, on which the sun threw metallic reflections, and on the other side rose heights covered by the forest of Riz. On the edge of this forest